Hello, welcome back to another video. We just completed another challenge video series on my Patreon page, where my Patreons voted and suggested scenes from different Studio Ghibli films that they wanted me to try to tackle and recreate or reimagine in some way. And Spirited Away won the vote, so I took on the challenge of creating one of the bathhouse scenes, and especially one where the character No Face is running after the main character. Here you can see the final animation that I made. I don't know if I have the rights to show anything from the actual film, and I will not risk it, so if you've seen it, you know which part this is referenced from. I began modeling the environment I wanted it to be set in. I'm using Cinema 4D here. The interior of this magical bathhouse that they are in has all these long corridors made out of sliding doors filled with artistic imagery. So when creating the environment, one challenge was to create enough textures to put on the walls. In Photoshop, I painted a collection of different tileable textures that could serve as the paintings on the walls. Having the actual film as reference made this, of course, a lot easier, as all the design decisions had already been made by all the talented people that created the film. So I just had to try to give my twist to it and take reference when needed. On my Patreon there is a 3-part video series about this shot, where I talk more in detail about how I made this whole shot come together. I built the scene in 3D because I wanted to try and add a camera movement down the corridor instead of keeping it static like the original shot from the film has. After animating my camera and deciding what type of movement I wanted for it, this is what the rendered background looked like. When wanting to animate a 2D character into a moving 3D render, there are a few challenges that arises. One is that you don't have the luxury of adding in-between frames to slow down or space out your animation as you go along, because you're drawing your character into the perspective of the moving 3D render. Were I to add more frames to the animation suddenly, I would basically throw it off sync. This means that it's good to have a clear plan of the movement you're after before starting to draw the frames properly, to know what timings you want. Since I created this in 3D, I took use of that and I animated a very simple shape that represents the character. That gave me enough information to start moving over to my 2D animation. All the 2D animation here was done in Photoshop, and I brought in a render of my background as a reference. I also had a render with the white blob in it as a reference as well for the movement. I then started blocking out the character with quite rough lines to get a feel for how the motion would play out. When the rough pass is done and I have enough information down for each frame, I start to clean it up on a separate layer. This second step is quite time consuming, especially if one intends to put a lot of details on each frame. The first rough pass was probably the most brain demanding state, because I had to figure out where each limb needed to go and where he should have his mouth open and where it should be closed, and his overall acting basically. The challenge of this second pass is more about getting the illustrations to look alright. The third stage in the animation process is to give him a base color and each element its own unshaded color. Then finally I gave him some simple shading. The original shot of the film has a few more layers of shading than what I have here, so mine is a bit simpler. I could have individually shaded the teeth and the tongue and so on, but I decided to throw in the towel at that stage, as this was entirely made as an experiment with my Patreons, and it's not gonna be used for anything more than this purpose. You can polish things forever, but sometimes we have to know when to call it done. Maybe if a few more of you guys join the Patreon, we can keep polishing and spend more time making videos like this. So do check it out, I have a link in the description. I then combined the 2D animation with my 3D render. And in one of my Patreon videos, I also showed a method of how you can combine a lower frame rate 2D animation with a higher frame rate camera movement. As the camera was moving down the corridor in some speed, I didn't want it to be animated on 12 FPS, which is what my character was animated on. So I got it working so that the character is still on 12 FPS, but the camera is moving on 24, but still making it look like the character is sitting within the 3D scene and not lagging behind every second frame. This is the final animation with some shadows and camera shake added. Hope you enjoyed this breakdown. Thanks to my Patreon crew for their support and their suggestions for this video. Feel free to subscribe here on YouTube, like the video, and head over to my Patreon for more regular videos and updates. I'll see you guys in the next one.